The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Gatcombe Park as Princess and sat in her study, surrounded by the familiar comfort of leather-bound books and family photographs. At 74, she had weathered countless storms, both personal and public, but today felt different. There was a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent hospital visit. Her mobile phone lay on the mahogany desk beside a half-finished cup of tea that had long since grown cold. She had been staring at it for the better part of an hour, knowing what she needed to do, but struggling to find the courage to make the call that would change everything. The study door creaked open, and her longtime secretary, Margaret, peered in with concern etched across her weathered face. "Your Royal Highness, shall I postpone your afternoon appointments? You seem rather pale today," and looked up, managing a weak smile. "No, Margaret, but perhaps you could ensure I'm not disturbed for the next hour or so. I have some personal matters to attend to." Margaret nodded, recognizing the tone that meant her employer needed privacy, as the door clicked shut and picked up her phone with trembling fingers. The contact list scrolled past familiar names: Charles, William, Harry, Camilla, but she hesitated at each one. How do you tell your family that everything they thought they knew about their history was built on carefully constructed lies? The medical report from her recent tests lay folded in the drawer, its contents burned into her memory. The genetic analysis had been routine, ordered by her physician as part of a comprehensive health screening. What it revealed, however, was anything but routine. The results showed markers that couldn't possibly exist if the official royal lineage was accurate, and had always prided herself on being the most straightforward member of the royal family. While her brothers navigated political complexities and her sister-in-law dealt with media scrutiny and had carved out a reputation for being direct, hardworking, and refreshingly honest. But now, at the twilight of her life, she was faced with a secret that could shatter the very foundation of the monarchy. The story began 50 years earlier in the private quarters of Buckingham Palace. Anne's mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had confided in her during a particularly difficult period following Princess Margaret's death. It was a conversation that Anne had promised to take to her grave, but now, with her own mortality staring her in the face, she questioned whether that promise still held. The Queen had been devastated by Margaret's passing, not just because of the loss of her beloved sister, but because Margaret had died carrying secrets that could have changed the course of royal history. In her grief, Elizabeth had shared something with, and that she had never told another soul. Something about Anne's own birth that called into question the very legitimacy of her place in the line of succession. As Anne sat in her study, memories flooded back of her childhood at Balmoral, of whispered conversations between her parents that would stop abruptly when she entered the room, of the way certain courtiers would look at her with a mixture of affection and something that might have been pity. She had always assumed it was because she was the spare, the daughter who would never inherit the throne, but now she understood there might have been much more to it. The genetic test results were unambiguous. The DNA marker showed that while Charles was indeed her full brother, their shared parentage wasn't what the world believed. The implications were staggering, not just for Anne personally, but for the entire royal family and the institution they represented. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter, Zara, asking about Christmas plans. The normalcy of it struck her as almost absurd. Here she was, holding information that could rewrite history, and the world continued to turn as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, at least for her, and thought about her grandchildren, about the legacy they would inherit, and about whether she had the right to burden them with this knowledge. She thought about Charles, now king, and whether he deserved to know the truth about their family's past. Most of all, she thought about her late mother, who had carried this burden for decades, and whether revealing the truth now would honor or betray Elizabeth's memory. The afternoon light was fading when Anne finally made her decision. She scrolled through her contacts one more time, stopping at a name that surprised even her. Instead of calling Charles or William first, she found herself dialing the number of someone who had been written off by the family, someone who had always claimed there were secrets hidden in the palace walls. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered, surprised but pleased to hear from her. "Anne, this is unexpected. How are you feeling? I heard you'd been under the weather. I need to see you," and said without preamble, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to set in motion. "There's something I need to tell you, something about our family that changes everything we thought we knew." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of something?" And closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's final words to her about keeping the family's secrets safe. The kind that could bring down the monarchy as we know it. "Can you come to Gackham tomorrow? And bring your phone. You're going to want to record this conversation." The silence that followed was deafening, and could practically hear the wheels turning in the other person's mind, weighing the implications of what she had just said. "Are you sure about this? And once you open this door, there's no closing it again." "I'm dying," and said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a physical presence. "The doctors haven't given me long, and I can't take this secret to my grave. The family needs to know the truth, even if it destroys us." As she ended the call, and felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. She had just set in motion events that would ripple through generations of royals. But for the first time in months, she could breathe freely. The weight of her mother's secret would soon be shared, and whatever consequences followed would be for others to navigate. She walked to the window and looked out at the grounds of Gackham Park, at the land she had loved and called home for decades. Tomorrow, everything would change. The carefully constructed narrative of royal bloodlines and divine right would be challenged in ways that no constitutional crisis had ever threatened before. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Charles, and stared at his name on the screen, knowing that this might be one of the last normal conversations they would ever have as siblings. Once the truth came out, their relationship, like everything else in their family, would be forever altered. "Hello, Charles," she answered, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. "And I was just calling to check on you. The doctor said your recent tests showed some concerning results. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was her brother, the king, showing the kind of caring concern that had always defined their relationship, completely unaware that she was about to drop a bombshell that would shake his reign to its very foundations. "I'm managing," she said carefully. "Actually, I was hoping we could all get together soon. Family dinner, perhaps? There are some things I'd like to discuss with everyone." "Of course. Is everything all right? You sound different." Anne smiled sadly, looking at a photograph of their mother on her desk. "Everything is about to be very different, Charles. But yes, in a way, everything might finally be all right." As she hung up the phone and realized that her final act as a working member of the royal family would be to tell the truth, regardless of the cost. The princess who had spent her life serving the crown was about to reveal the secret that could destroy it, and there was a certain poetic justice in that which she found oddly comforting. The rain continued to fall against the windows as darkness settled over Gackham Park, and Princess began to plan for what might very well be the most important conversation of her life. The morning mist hung low over the Gloucestershire countryside as Princess prepared for what she knew would be the most difficult day of her life. She had barely slept, her mind racing through decades of memories, searching for clues she might have missed, signs that could have prepared her for this moment. Margaret had arrived early with a breakfast tray that remained untouched on the kitchen counter. The longtime secretary had worked for the royal family long enough to sense when something monumental was brewing, and the tension in the air at Gackham Park was almost palpable. "Your guest has arrived, Your Royal Highness," Margaret announced quietly, her voice carrying a note of concern. She had been surprised when and had requested that all other staff be given the day off, leaving just the two of them in the sprawling estate, and nodded, checking her reflection one final time in the hallway mirror. She looked older than her years, the weight of her secret having carved deeper lines around her eyes. Today, she would either free herself from a lifetime of burden or destroy everything her family had worked to build. Perhaps both. The visitor waiting in the drawing room was someone Amelia would never have expected to see at a private royal residence. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, had been effectively exiled from the inner circle of the royal family for over 3 decades, Her relationship with the monarchy strained by scandals, financial troubles, and a divorce that had been played out in the most public and humiliating ways possible. And it called her for precisely those reasons. Sarah had always been an outsider, someone who had seen the family's dysfunction from a unique perspective. More importantly, she was someone who had already been vilified by the press and survived. If anyone could handle the explosive nature of what and was about to reveal, it was the woman who had endured decades of public scrutiny and somehow emerged stronger. "Sarah," and said as she entered the room, noting how her former sister-in-law looked up with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course," Sarah replied, rising from her chair. "Your call yesterday was, well, it was terrifying, if I'm being honest. What's this about, and what secret could possibly be so devastating?" And gestured for Sarah to sit back down, then took a deep breath. "Before I tell you anything, I need you to understand the magnitude of what I'm about to share. This isn't palace gossip or family drama. This is information that could fundamentally alter how the world sees the monarchy." Sarah's expression grew serious. "You mentioned recording our conversation. Are you planning to go public with whatever this is?" "Not immediately," and said, pulling out her phone and placing on the coffee table between them. "But I'm dying, Sarah. The doctors have given me weeks, maybe a month, if I'm lucky. I can't take this knowledge to my grave, but I also can't burden my children with the decision of what to do with it. So I'm telling you, because you're the one person in our extended family who has nothing left to lose." The recording app was already running on his phone, a fact that made Sarah visibly uncomfortable. "And are you absolutely certain about this? Recording a conversation like this will create a permanent record that can't be denied or twisted later," and finished. "Yes, I know exactly what I'm doing. Now, what I'm about to tell you begins with my mother's final confession to me, something she shared in the weeks before she died." Anne's voice grew softer as she began to recount the conversation that had haunted her for over 2 years. It had been a cold February evening at Windsor Castle, and the Queen had summoned her daughter for what she said was an urgent private matter. Elizabeth had been frilier than usual, her mind sharp, but her body clearly failing. She told me that during the 1940s, when she was still Princess Elizabeth, there had been concerns about her ability to conceive, and explained, watching Sarah's face carefully. The pressure to produce heirs was enormous, especially given the constitutional crisis that had brought her father to the throne. Sarah leaned forward, clearly captivated despite her nervousness. "What kind of concerns?" "Medical issues that weren't well understood at the time. The royal physicians were worried that she might never be able to have children naturally. This was before Charles was born, obviously, and the thought of another succession crisis was terrifying to everyone involved." And paused, giving Sarah time to absorb the implications. "What my mother told me next has kept me awake at night for over 2 years. She said that when she finally did conceive Charles, it wasn't in the way the world believed." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's face had gone pale, and she gripped the arms of her chair tightly. "And what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Charles's conception involved medical intervention that wasn't publicly acknowledged. But more than that, I'm saying that the genetic testing I had done recently revealed something that calls into question everything we thought we knew about our family." And reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder containing her medical records. "The DNA analysis shows markers that shouldn't exist if our official family tree is accurate. Markers that suggest Charles and I share a mother, but not the father that history records." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "You're saying that Prince Philip wasn't your father?" "I'm saying that the genetic evidence strongly suggests our biological father was someone else entirely. Someone whose identity could shake the very foundations of the monarchy if it ever became public knowledge." The implications hung in the air between them like a thundercloud. Sarah, despite her years of experience with royal scandals, looked genuinely shocked. Who is it?" Anne's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "My mother never told me directly, but she provided enough clues that I was able to piece it together. It was someone who had access to the royal family during the crucial period, someone whose own bloodline had historical significance, and someone whose involvement would explain certain irregularities in our family's documented history. She pulled out a photograph from a folder, one that had been taken at a royal gathering in the late 1940s. In it, a young Princess Elizabeth stood beside a man whose resemblance to both and Charles was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Lord Mountbatten, Sarah breathed, recognizing the figure immediately. Uncle Dickie, and confirmed, using the family nickname. Philip's uncle, the man who essentially orchestrated Philip and Elizabeth's marriage, the man who had his own ambitions for influence over the monarchy. My mother suggested that when it became clear that natural conception might be impossible, Mountbatten proposed a solution that would keep the bloodline within the extended family while ensuring the succession continued. Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind clearly racing through the implications. But that would mean Charles's claim to the throne is legitimate through our mother's line. But our father's identity has been deliberately misrepresented for over 70 years. It would mean that Philip was never our biological father, despite playing that role our entire lives. It would mean that Mountbatten's genetic legacy is what actually sits on the throne today. The recording device continued to capture every word as in laid out the evidence she had compiled. Bank records showing payments to private physicians. Coded correspondence between Mountbatten and certain medical professionals. Travel records that placed key figures in strategic locations during crucial time frames. My mother kept everything and explained. Every document, every receipt, every letter. She said it was insurance in case the truth ever needed to be revealed to protect the institution. But she also made me promise that I would only share this information if it became absolutely necessary. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the enormity of what she had just heard. And you believe it's become necessary now? I believe that with Charles on the throne and me dying, this secret is too dangerous to die with me. What if someone else discovers the truth and uses it as a weapon against the monarchy? What if my children or grandchildren find out accidentally and are forced to make impossible decisions without context? What if the media eventually pieces together the clues I've been able to follow? And stood and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where she had raised her children, where she had found peace away from the pressures of royal duty. I'm not saying we should announce this to the world tomorrow, but I am saying that key family members need to know the truth so they can make informed decisions about how to handle it. Sarah joined her at the window, the recording device still capturing their conversation from across the room. Who else are you planning to tell? Charles needs to know, obviously. William should know, as the heir. But beyond that, and shrugged. I'm hoping that once the immediate family understands the situation, they could decide together how to proceed. The two women stood in silence for several minutes, watching the autumn leaves fall in the garden outside. Finally, Sarah spoke again. And you realize that if this information ever becomes public, it won't just affect the current generation. It will raise questions about every major decision the monarchy has made for the past 70 years. It could retroactively delegitimize policies, laws, appointments. I know, and said quietly. But the alternative is living with a lie that gets more dangerous with every passing year. Medical science is advancing rapidly. Genetic testing is becoming more common and more sophisticated. How long before someone else stumbles onto this information? How long before a routine medical procedure or a genealogy project reveals what I've discovered? And returned to her chair and picked up the phone, stopping the recording. I've told you the basic outline, but there's much more. Documents, photographs, testimonies from people who are now dead, but who left written accounts. My mother was meticulous about documentation. Sarah remained standing by the window, her reflection visible in the glass alongside the view of the garden. What do you want me to do with this information? I want you to help me tell the family, and said. You've always been good at handling difficult conversations, and you're already seen as an outsider. If this conversation goes badly, if people react with anger or denial, your involvement provides a buffer. They can blame you for encouraging me, or for being a bad influence. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Sarah, who had been ostracized by the royal family for her perceived indiscretions, was now being asked to help them navigate their most dangerous secret. "When do you want to do this?" Sarah asked, finally turning away from the window. "Charles is coming for dinner tomorrow night. Just family, he thinks. I was hoping you could be here too, to provide support and to serve as a witness to whatever decisions we make." And paused, then added, "and to help me find the courage to actually go through with this." Sarah walked back to her chair and sat down heavily. "And I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this? About the genetic testing, about your mother's confession, about all of it?" And nodded grimly. "I've had the DNA analysis verified by 3 different laboratories. I've had historians examine the documents. I've even had handwriting experts authenticate the correspondence. Everything checks out." She reached for the folder again, pulling out additional photographs and documents. "Look at this. A letter from Mountbatten to his personal physician, dated 6 months before Charles was born. He refers to our special project and mentions ensuring the bloodline continues in the most appropriate manner." Sarah examined the letter, her expression growing more troubled with each line. This is explosive, and it's just the tip of the iceberg," and said, "There are medical records, financial transactions, even what appears to be a contract outlining how all parties would maintain secrecy about the arrangement." As the afternoon wore on, and continued to share details that painted a picture of a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful figures in British society. It was a story of desperation, ambition, and pragmatism that had shaped the monarchy for generations without anyone outside a very small circle ever knowing the truth. "The most heartbreaking part," and said as their conversation drew to a close, "is that my mother lived her entire life believing she had betrayed both Philip and the country by allowing this deception. She never forgave herself for the choice she felt forced to make, and she never felt worthy of the love and respect the nation showed her." Sarah reached across and took Anne's hand. "You know that once you tell Charles tomorrow night, there's no going back. Are you prepared for the possibility that this could destroy the family?" And squeezed her hand in return. "I'm prepared for the possibility that keeping this secret any longer could destroy the family even more completely. At least this way, they'll have a choice about how to handle the truth." As Sarah prepared to leave, and made one final request. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, whatever decisions we make as a family, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if something happens to me before we can figure out the right way to handle this, you'll make sure the truth doesn't die with me. The family deserves to know their real history, even if they choose to keep it private." Sarah nodded solemnly. "I promise." As her former sister-in-law's car disappeared down the long driveway and returned to her study and looked once more at the evidence that would either liberate or destroy her family. Tomorrow night, she would find out which. The evening of revelation had arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made Gatcombe Park feel almost ethereal in the golden autumn light. Princess and moved through her final preparations with the methodical precision that had defined her entire life of royal service. But her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the documents that would alter her family's understanding of themselves forever. The dining room had been set for an intimate family gathering. Just Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, and Sarah, who had arrived early to provide moral support, and had deliberately kept the guest list small, knowing that what she was about to reveal would be difficult enough to process without the complications that additional family members might bring. Margaret had prepared a simple meal before departing for her cottage in the village, leaving the family to what she assumed would be a pleasant evening together. The longtime secretary had no idea that she was witnessing the final hours of the royal family, as the world knew it. Charles arrived promptly at 7, looking relaxed and happy to be spending an evening away from the endless responsibilities of kingship. He embraced his sister warmly, noting that she seemed thinner than when he had last seen her, but attributing it to her recent health concerns rather than the weight of the secret she was carrying. "You look tired," and he said with genuine concern. "Are you sure you're feeling up to hosting tonight?" We could have easily done this at Clarence's house. No, Anne replied, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. This needed to be here, in my home. There's something about being on familiar ground that makes difficult conversations easier. William and Catherine arrived shortly after, followed by Camilla, who brought flowers from her own garden and seemed genuinely pleased to be included in what she assumed was a casual family dinner. The conversation during cocktails was light and comfortable, focused on the grandchildren's activities, upcoming royal engagements, and Charles's adaptation to his new role as monarch. Sarah Ferguson's presence raised a few eyebrows, but Anne smoothly explained that she had been feeling nostalgic about old times and wanted to reconnect with family members she hadn't seen enough of recently. It was a plausible enough explanation that no one questioned it further. As they moved to the dining room, Anne caught Sarah's eye and nodded slightly. The recording device was already running, hidden in a flower arrangement at the center of the table. Tonight's conversation would be documented in its entirety, creating an unassailable record of what transpired. The dinner conversation remained pleasant through the first 2 courses, but Anne could feel the tension building in her chest as the moment of truth approached. She had rehearsed what she would say dozens of times, but now, faced with the reality of destroying her family's peace, she struggled to find the right words. It was Charles who inadvertently provided the opening she needed. "And I've been thinking about Mother's papers," he said as Margaret's carefully prepared dessert was being served. "The archivists at Windsor have been asking about personal correspondence that might have historical significance. Have you come across anything in your own records that we should consider for preservation?" The irony of the question wasn't lost on Anne. Here was her brother, unwittingly asking about the very documents that would reshape his understanding of his own identity. "Actually, Charles," Anne said, her voice slightly hoarse, "there is something significant that Mother shared with me before she died. Something that affects all of us." The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. William set down his fork, sensing the shift in his aunt's tone. Catherine reached for her husband's hand instinctively. Camilla looked confused, while Sarah appeared nervous despite knowing what was coming. "What kind of something?" Charles asked, his expression growing serious, and took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the next words, their family would never be the same. "Before I tell you, I need everyone to understand that Mother carried this secret for over 70 years. She shared it with me because she couldn't bear to take it to her grave, but she also made me promise to protect the family from unnecessary pain." "And you're scaring us," William said gently. What secret could be so serious? Instead of answering directly, Anne stood and retrieved the folder of documents she had prepared. She placed it on the table, unopened, like a bomb waiting to detonate. 2 months ago, I had comprehensive genetic testing done as part of my cancer treatment. She began, the word cancer causing audible gasps around the table. The results revealed something that doesn't match our official family history. Charles leaned forward, his face pale. "What do you mean, doesn't match?" "I mean that the DNA analysis shows genetic markers that shouldn't exist if our recorded parentage is accurate." Anne's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Markers that led me to investigate further, which is when I discovered that Mother had kept extensive documentation about circumstances surrounding our births that were never made public." Camilla spoke for the first time since they had sat down. "And what are you saying exactly?" And opened the folder and pulled out the genetic testing results, spreading them across the table where everyone could see them. "I'm saying that Charles and I share a mother, but the genetic evidence strongly suggests that Prince Philip was not our biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. William's face went completely white, while Catherine put her hand over her mouth in shock. Charles stared at the papers in front of him, as if they were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mother would have told us. She would never have kept something like that from us. Wouldn't she?" And asked gently. "Charles, think about the pressure she was under. Think about what it would have meant for the monarchy if she couldn't produce heirs naturally. Think about what desperate people might do to ensure the succession continued." Sarah, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward slightly. Tell them about Lord Mountbatten, and the name hung in the air like a physical presence. Charles's face went even paler, if possible, as he stared at his sister. Uncle Dickie, William asked, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing, and nodded, pulling out the photograph she had shown Sarah the day before. According to the documentation Mother left, and based on the genetic analysis, Lord Mountbatten was our biological father. Philip's uncle, the man who orchestrated the marriage between our parents, the man who had his own ambitions for influence over the monarchy. Charles stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as he tried to absorb the magnitude of what his sister was telling him. And this would mean that everything we've believed about our family is a lie. Not a lie, and corrected. Philip raised us as his own children. He loved us as his own children. But biologically, yes, our parentage is different from what the world believes. William found his voice, though it shook slightly. Aunt, and are you absolutely certain about this? Have you verified the testing? Could there be a mistake? And pulled out additional documents, laboratory reports from 3 different facilities, historical records, correspondence between key figures from the late 1940s. I've had everything verified multiple times. I consulted with geneticists, historians, even handwriting experts. The evidence is overwhelming. Catherine, who had been silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. What does this mean for the monarchy? For our children? It was the question everyone had been afraid to ask, and looked around the table at faces that showed varying degrees of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding of the implications. Legally, it doesn't change anything, she said carefully. Charles's claim to the throne comes through our mother's line, which has never been in question. Mountbatten was himself connected to the royal family through multiple bloodlines, so even from a genealogical standpoint, the monarchy's legitimacy isn't threatened. But politically, Charles asked, returning to the table, but remaining standing. Politically, it's potentially devastating and admitted. If this information became public, it would raise questions about 70 years of royal decisions. Every policy, every appointment, every major event of our mother's reign could be scrutinized through the lens of this hidden truth. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her own phone and asked me to be here tonight as a witness and to help document this conversation. She wanted to ensure that whatever decisions you make as a family are made with full knowledge and are properly recorded. Charles stared at her, then and you're recording this? Every word and confirmed. Because once I'm gone, there can't be any question about what was said or what decisions were made. The family needs to have a clear record of how you chose to handle this information. William ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded everyone present of his younger self during difficult moments. Aunt Anne, why are you telling us this now? Why not let the secret die with you? Anne's expression grew sad as she considered the question. Because secrets this big don't stay buried forever, William. Medical science is advancing too rapidly. Genetic testing is becoming too common. How long before someone else stumbles onto this information? How long before it comes out in a way that you can't control? She sat back down, suddenly, looking every one of her 74 years. At least this way, you have time to prepare. You have time to decide how to handle it if it ever becomes public. You have time to control the narrative instead of having it controlled for you. Camilla, who had been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke again. What exactly are you asking us to do with this information? I'm not asking you to do anything, Anne replied. I'm simply ensuring that you have the full truth about our family's history. What you choose to do with that truth is entirely up to you. Charles returned to his seat, his face showing the weight of kingship in a way that seemed to have aged him years in the space of an hour. Have you told anyone else? No one, Anne said firmly. Sarah is the only person outside this room who knows, and that's only because I needed someone to help me find the courage to tell you. The conversation continued for another 2 hours as family members asked questions, examined documents, and struggled to reconcile this new information with everything they thought they knew about their history. The genetic testing was reviewed in detail, the historical documentation was scrutinized, and the implications for the future were discussed with increasing gravity. As the evening wound down, no firm decisions were made about how to handle the revelation. Everyone needed time to process what they had learned, to consider the implications, and to decide individually how they felt about carrying this knowledge forward. "There's one more thing," and said as the family prepared to leave. "The cancer is aggressive. The doctors have given me weeks, maybe a month. If we're going to make any decisions as a family about how to handle this information, we need to make them soon." The second bombshell of the evening hit with almost as much force as the first. Charles immediately moved to his sister's side, wrapping her in an embrace that conveyed decades of sibling affection and support. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Because I needed to tell you about our parentage first," Anne replied. "I couldn't risk dying before you knew the truth about our family." As the family members departed that night, each carrying the weight of Anne's revelations, none of them could have predicted how dramatically their lives were about to change. The secret that had shaped their mother's entire life was now theirs to bear, and the decisions they made in the coming weeks would determine not just their own futures, but the future of the institution they represented. The recording device continued running long after the last car had left Gatcombe Park, capturing the sound of Anne's quiet sobs as she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had just done to the people she loved most in the world. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating dinner at Gatcombe Park, and Princess Anne could feel her strength ebbing with each passing day. The cancer was moving faster than anyone had anticipated, but she felt a peace that had eluded her for years. The secret that had consumed her thoughts since her mother's confession was finally shared, and whatever happened next would be in other hands. The family had gathered twice more since that initial revelation, each meeting more emotional and complex than the last. Charles had struggled the most with the news, spending hours poring over the documentation and had provided, seeking flaws in the evidence that might prove his sister wrong. But each expert consultation only confirmed what Anne had discovered. William had taken a different approach, focusing on the practical implications and working with constitutional lawyers to understand how this information might affect the monarchy if it ever became public. The legal consensus was clear. Charles's legitimacy as king was unquestionable through his maternal line, but the political ramifications of the truth about his parentage could be catastrophic. Catherine had surprised everyone with her pragmatic response to the revelation. During their second family meeting, she had pointed out that the monarchy had survived scandals, wars, and constitutional crises for over 1,000 years precisely, because it had shown the ability to adapt and evolve. The question wasn't whether they could survive this secret becoming public, but whether they could control how that revelation occurred. It was Camilla who had ultimately proposed the solution that the family was now considering. As someone who had lived through decades of negative media coverage and public scrutiny, she understood better than most how perception could be managed and narratives could be shaped. Her suggestion was both bold and simple. Tell the truth themselves, on their own terms, before someone else discovered it. The days of royal secrets lasting forever are over, she had argued during their most recent meeting. If we wait for this to come out accidentally, we lose all control over how it's presented. But if we reveal it ourselves, we can frame it as a story of love, sacrifice, and the lengths to which previous generations went to ensure the monarchy's survival. Sarah Ferguson had become an unlikely ally in these discussions, her outsider status allowing her to ask questions that family members were too emotionally invested to voice. She had also taken on the delicate task of reaching out to trusted historians and media experts to gauge how such a revelation might be received by the public. The results of those conversations had been surprisingly encouraging. Several experts had pointed out that the British public had shown remarkable resilience and adaptability when it came to royal revelations. The scandals of the 1990s, the death of Diana, the various controversies involving younger royals, all had been weathered successfully. More importantly, The revelation about Charles's biological parentage could actually strengthen the monarchy's legitimacy by demonstrating the lengths to which previous generations had gone to ensure continuity. But it was the conversation Anne had with her son Peter that had finally convinced her that the family needed to act decisively. Peter had visited Gatcombe Park the previous week, ostensibly to check on his mother's health, but really to discuss the implications of what he had learned from his cousin William. "Mum," he had said as they sat together in her study, "I've been thinking about what you've shared with the family, and I need you to know something. Whatever you and Uncle Charles decide to do with this information, the younger generation supports you." And had looked at her son with surprise. "You've discussed this with the others?" Zara knows, obviously, and William told Harry during one of their recent phone calls. "We all agree that carrying this secret indefinitely isn't sustainable." Peter had paused, choosing his words carefully. "We also agree that if this information is going to become public eventually, it should come from us, not from some investigative journalist or conspiracy theorist with their own agenda." That conversation had prompted Anne to make one final phone call, the most important one of her life. She had waited until she was alone at Gatcombe Park, with Margaret given the day off and no visitors expected. The call would determine not just how her family's secret was handled, but how her own legacy would be remembered. The number she dialed was one that few people outside the royal family possessed, the private line to Charles's personal study at Clarence House. It rang twice before her brother answered, his voice tired but warm. "And how are you feeling today? I was planning to visit this afternoon." "Charles, I need you to listen to me carefully," Anne said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "I'm calling to tell you what I think we should do about our situation, and I need to know whether you'll support my decision." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What decision?" Anne took a deep breath, gathering her strength for what she knew would be her final act of service to the monarchy. "I think we should tell the truth. Not immediately, not in a way that causes panic or chaos, but deliberately and carefully. We should tell the story of our mother's sacrifice, of the difficult choice she made to ensure the succession continued." And Charles began, but she cut him off. "Let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. This secret has poisoned our family's story for 70 years. It turned our mother into a woman who couldn't fully enjoy her own reign because she felt like a fraud. It's made you question your own legitimacy as king. It's forced us to live with the constant fear that someone else might discover the truth and use it against us." Charles was quiet on the other end of the line, and could hear the sound of papers rustling, suggesting he was in his study reviewing the documents she had provided. "What are you proposing exactly?" he asked finally. "I'm proposing that we work with trusted historians and media experts to craft a narrative that presents the truth in its proper historical context. We explain that our mother faced an impossible situation and made a choice that ensured the monarchy's survival. We emphasize that your legitimacy comes through the maternal line and has never been in question. We control the story instead of letting someone else control it for us." And paused, then continued with growing conviction. "Charles, think about it. This could actually strengthen the monarchy. It shows that previous generations were willing to make personal sacrifices for the institution. It demonstrates that the royal family has always been human, faced with human dilemmas, but committed to serving something larger than themselves." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Charles finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "You're asking me to potentially destroy everything our mother worked to build. I'm asking you to save it," and replied firmly. "Charles, you've been king for just over a year, and already you're governing under the shadow of a secret that could destroy your reign if it comes out accidentally. How can you lead effectively when you're constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop?" She could hear him breathing heavily, the weight of kingship and this impossible decision clearly taking its toll. "What about William? Catherine? The children? They didn't ask for this. None of us asked for this," and said gently. "But William agrees with me. So does Catherine. They understand that managing this revelation proactively is better than having it forced upon them later. As for the children, they'll grow up in a world where they know their true history from the beginning, instead of discovering it accidentally someday. Charles was quiet again and pressed her advantage. "There's something else, Charles. Something I haven't told you yet." "What now?" he asked, and she could hear the exhaustion in his voice. The historian Sarah spoke with mentioned that there have been rumors for decades. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be proven, but whispers in academic circles about irregularities in the royal genealogy. It's only a matter of time before someone with the right resources decides to investigate those rumors seriously. This revelation seemed to shake Charles more than anything else and had shared. "What kind of rumors?" "Questions about the timing of our births, inconsistencies in medical records, financial transactions that didn't make sense at the time. Nothing that would have been significant in the 1950s or 1960s, but in an age of genetic testing and investigative journalism. And let the implication hang in the air. So you're saying it's not a matter of if this comes out, but when?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And, Charles, I'm dying. Once I'm gone, you'll be the only person left who knows the full story, who has access to all the documentation, who can control how the truth is revealed. Do you really want to carry that burden alone for the rest of your reign?" The emotional weight of her words seemed to break through Charles's resistance. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with tears. "And I can't lose you and deal with this revelation at the same time. It's too much. You won't be dealing with it alone," and assured him. "William and Catherine are with you. Even Sarah has offered to help in any way she can. And, Charles, think about this. If we handle this revelation properly, it could be one of the defining moments of your reign. Not a scandal that destroys you, but a demonstration of your courage and commitment to honesty." And could hear movement on the other end of the line, suggesting that Charles was pacing, something he did when wrestling with difficult decisions. "What exactly are you proposing we do?" he asked. "I'm proposing that we work with a small team of trusted advisors to develop a comprehensive plan. We choose the historians who will help us present the information accurately. We select the media outlets that will break the story responsibly. We craft a narrative that emphasizes the historical significance rather than the scandal. And we do it while I'm still alive to provide context and answer questions." The logic of her proposal seemed to be breaking through Charles's emotional resistance. "How long would this take to organize?" "A few weeks, maybe a month if we're careful about it." "But, Charles, we don't have much longer than that anyway. The cancer is moving faster than the doctors expected." There was another long pause, and could almost hear her brother's internal struggle. Finally, he spoke with a voice that carried the weight of his decision. "If we do this, and there's no going back. Once this information is public, everything changes forever." "Everything is going to change anyway," and replied. "The question is whether we control that change or whether it controls us." Charles took a deep breath and could hear clearly through the phone. "All right, if this is what you think we need to do, if this is how you want to handle Mother's secret, then I'll support you. But, and I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if at any point during this process you change your mind, if you decide that the risk is too great, you'll tell me immediately. This is your decision to make, and if you want to stop, we stop." And felt tears welling up in her eyes for the first time since her diagnosis. "I promise, Charles, but I won't change my mind. This is the right thing to do, for all of us." As they continued to discuss the practical details of how such a revelation might be managed, and felt a sense of completion that had been missing from her life for years. She had served the monarchy faithfully for over 7 decades, and this final act of service, ensuring that her family's secret was revealed on their own terms, felt like the most important thing she had ever done. "Charles," she said as their conversation began to wind down, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Mother will be proud of you. You're showing exactly the kind of courage and wisdom that the monarchy needs." "I love you," and Charles replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Whatever happens with this revelation, whatever the consequences, I'm grateful that we're facing it together." "I love you too," and said, knowing that this might be the last significant conversation she would ever have with her brother. Now, let's get to work. We have a story to tell, and we're going to tell it right. As she hung up the phone, Princess and felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The secret that had haunted her mother and threatened to destroy her family was finally going to be addressed openly and honestly. Whatever the consequences, they would face them together as a family with dignity and courage. Outside the windows of Gatcombe Park, the autumn light was fading, but inside and felt as if dawn was finally breaking after a very long and difficult night. The truth, as her mother had always taught her, had a way of setting people free, even when that freedom came at a tremendous cost. In the weeks that followed that final phone call, the royal family would work together to craft one of the most significant revelations in modern monarchy history. The story that emerged would change how the world understood the royal family, but it would also demonstrate their commitment to honesty, transparency, and service above self-interest. Princess Anne would not live to see the public reaction to their revelation, but she would die knowing that she had given her family the greatest gift she could offer, the truth delivered with love, courage, and an unshakable belief in their ability to weather any storm together.